Hey everyone, I want to create a pretty sweet tutorial today. I want to recreate the shield that Winston uses in Overwatch. What I want to do is I want to take you through modeling the sphere, UV mapping it correctly for the shield. I want to make the shader, and I want to make a value that you can lerp that will look like you hit the shield, like it'll flash. I want to get the scan lines going over the hexagon grid, and I want to get cracking going because in Overwatch, what happens is, you hit the shield enough, it cracks, then it cracks again, then it explodes. I want to show you how to do that, and yeah, it's going to be pretty awesome. So there's three textures that we need for this. One is the hexagonal grid that goes over the entire shield. One is the kind of scan lines that pan over the shield and kind of make the hexagon grid appear. And then another is the crack texture. I have made all three of these textures ahead of time, and I will be happy to share them. I'll try to put a link right in the YouTube video. So, well, sorry, in the description. So yeah, let's get started by jumping into Maya. Okay, so I've got a brand new project in Maya. A lot of times I like using quad spheres. For this one, we're just going to use the default Maya sphere. And the reason for that is they give it to us UV mapped exactly how we already want it. So we're just going to click this, and well, first we need to scale it. So let's give it a scale. I'm thinking in Overwatch it's about, I don't know, let's say a 3-meter radius. 6 meters in distance in total. I think that's about right. So let's 3 meters. So we're going to go 300 because it's in centimeters, and 300 meters. And so I've got this hexagon grid on it already. And I'm just going to show you here. So if I bring up my UV editor, so Windows, general editor, general editors. Wow, I'm just all sorts of mixed up today. Is it not in the general editor? Sorry, modeling editors, my God. UV editor. So click that, and we're going to see this is how the UV is set up right now. So I have this material that I've created in this, I guess, not so new project. Whoops. And it's just this grid that, and this is actually the grid that we're going to be using in game. We're going to tile it so it isn't quite this big and large, but this is the one that we're using in the game, in Unity, I should say. So one of the problems is this is really stretched horizontally, and then up here it's stretched vertically. We can't fix both problems, but I think it should look better in the middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the whole UV shell, and we're just going to scale it down. And that's going to stretch these guys up, and they're going to look more like true hexagons, pretty close. And then it's going to stretch up here. And don't worry, we're going to tile this more once we're in the shader. So it's going to look a lot better than this. But for now, this looks pretty good. So let's grab this. And there's one more thing we have to do. We are going to want to duplicate this. And then the second one, we're going to want to make a lot smaller. So let's go to our scale, and let's go 0.995 for all three, X, Y, Z. And then, as we can see, we have this other sphere inside because it's a little smaller than the first one. And we're just going to go to mesh display, and we're going to reverse. And that way, that gives us the inside of our sphere. The reason we're doing this, like we could set the shader to use both sides of the face, and that'll work. But what I've learned is that actually creates some weird artifacts with transparency. So we're not going to do it that way. We're going to have an inside face and an outside face. So let's combine these. Shift click and combine. And then we are going to get rid of this history. So edit, delete by type, history. And then we are going to say modify, freeze transformations. And now we are ready to export it. Well, not quite. We're going to rename it. Let's rename it to Winston Shield. And select it. File, send to Unity, selection, pick our correct project, assets, models, and we're going to call it Winston Shield. Done. Oops. I'm not going to worry about saving the saving the project right now. I mean, it took me like 2 seconds. So let's flip back to Unity, hit refresh, and we should see our model in here, and we do, Winston Shield. So here it is. Beautiful. So before we do anything, let's go create a material for it. So material, create, hit show and explorer. Whoops. I'm just gonna get rid of that before it messes me up or something here. So create material, Winston Shield, and let's drag it onto here, and the texture disappears, and that's fine. So I mentioned I'm using 3 different textures. We're going to use those in a second, and right now we are going to create a new shader. So we have this material. We need to create a shader to attach to it. So we're going to go Windows. I'm using Amplify shader, but you can also use the shader graph, no problem. So I'm going to go open a new canvas in Amplify shader. Just drag it over here. Put it right here, and I'm going to save it as Winston Shield. Give it 2 seconds to save. Amplify shader saves slow for some reason, probably just my computer. Okay, so Winston Shield. So we're gonna want to leave color mode on back. That's perfect. I don't want to cast shadows or receive shadows with this. We can change that later. I just don't want to right now. We're gonna go transparent. For both render type and render queue. We can hit OK. Oh, sorry, one thing. We want to use a surface shader, but we want it to be unlit. We don't want reflections and all that crap. I mean, you could do that, but let's try to follow Overwatch as closely as we can. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a color, because we want a color for our shield. And that's not what we want. We want the literal color node, which is right here. And we're going to put that into emission. And let's just make it a nice blue, kind of like in Overwatch. And let's hit refresh. Oh, right. We have to, so click on the material and down in, click on the game object. And in the material it's using, let's use the shader dropdown and let's go to Winston Shield. And let's close this window here and let's open this one instead. Because then that's going to, sorry, I don't want you guys to see the other one quite yet. I have the other one on my screen because I did it, earlier today as practice, and I'm going to kind of use it as a base. So, so we have this color here, Winston Shield. We're golden. That's a good start. So, color works. So now we need the opacity. So the trickiest part about this is all the different things that are happening. We've got a hexagon grid. We've got like when it intersects with other meshes, you get a kind of glow effect around there. We got to deal with that. We have to deal with the cracking of the shield when it gets hit. We have to deal with the glow when it gets hit. I don't even know if that actually happens, to be honest, but I think it does. And whatever, we're going to make it happen anyway. And if you don't want to use it, you don't want to use it. And then we also have like the scan lines that come from the top and kind of reveal the hexagon grid. So let's get that hexagon grid set up first. So I'm going to go with a texture sample. And we're just going to, so I have, this is one of the textures that I'm using that I said I can easily supply if anyone would like. Well, I'll put a link to it. So we have our grid, and let's reverse this grid. So let's use 1 minus. So that'll take a 0 to 1 number and reverse it, right? And let's just throw that into opacity and see what happens. So we've got a grid, and so this is working already. This is going well. Excellent. Now, the hexagons look way too big. Let's change that first. Let's go UV map. Let's go plug that into here, and let's make it 4, 4. Ooh, much better already. Now, actually, that's pretty much all we have to do for the grid for now. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to get those scan lines going. Super easy. We need another texture sample. And we're going to, so I think I called it horizontal lines blurred. Yeah, I got a lot of textures in here. Okay, so we're good there. Let's do the whole texture coordinates thing again. And let's put a panner into here. Okay, so we're going to set this panner here, and we're going to just pan this. So let's pan it on the Y at like 0.1 or something. It looks slow enough. And then let's multiply that by this guy. Let's just see what happens. And let's plug that into opacity. That's great, except it's not panning for some reason. Why is that not panning? It's literally put in right there. Oh, there. Oh, sorry, I turned my shader preview off. So it's panning pretty fast. Let's slow that down a bit. Let's go 0.05. Let's cut it in half. There you go. It looks a little better. Might be a little crazy still, but we're going to be adjusting this for a long time. So, sorry, not for a long time, but we're going to do a lot of adjustments. So that's all well and good. Here's the tricky part. We need to, first of all, let's get a Fresnel effect going. I love Fresnel effects. And let's clamp that baby. And let's add this into the opacity. So we're going to actually add it. So we're going to take this, and then we're going to throw that into opacity. Let's see what happens. Cool. So that looks pretty cool. And then we are also going to get the cracking going right away. But first, we need to add some opacity to this inside the hexagons because it's not that see-through in the game. So let's add a float. And let's make this a property. And let's call it shield opacity. And let's go with adding this right into here as well. Is that what we want to do? No. Well, I'm going to refer to my trusty... well, I mean, we could do it that way. Okay, so in the one I have, what I'm doing is I'm going... Yeah, I don't know if I like this, but... actually, sorry, let's not get that far yet. So I'm going to add this to the Fresnel. Okay, and then we're going to take that and we're going to clamp it. Of course, clamping is always your friend. And we are going to get rid of this. And let's do this. And let's put this at oh, that's way too bright. Let's put it at 0.2. There we go. So now we get a little bit of a shield, plus we get the extra hexagon stuff going there. And I think what we want to do is we actually want to add the hexagon grid to the color, not the opacity. So what I mean by that is the opacity is going to be the same all around, but what we're going to do is we're going to add to that color, and it's going to make it brighter in the spots where the hexagon grid is being hit by the horizontal lines, or horizontal lines. Yes, that was right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and we're just going to put this right into here. We're going to get rid of this sucker. We're not going to get rid of it yet. What we're going to do is we're going to add it to this. Could do it that way. Yes. Yes. I like that. No, these need to stay together. So I'm going to create a new add here. I'm going to add this. Oh, my bad. No, this was right in the first place. I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, perfect. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this color in here, and I'm going to add this to it, and it's going to make it a brighter blue, right? It's going to add to it, so it's almost going to make it like almost like white, I guess. I like that effect better, and it's really going to come into use when we do the cracks and some of the other stuff, which is pretty cool. So let's keep going. So we've got the grid, we've got this. Let's get the cracks going right now, because I think that's probably one of the coolest parts. And I'm just going to refer to my other screen here. So we need a texture sample, and we're going to choose the cracks. that I have created. And then we're going to, well, again, we're going to do a texture coordinate thing, because what we want to do with this is we actually want these cracks to be, well, here. We want to tile them a bit. So let's go 4 and 4. See how that works. And we're going to remap these. And I'll show you how this works. So let's make a float. Okay. We're going to make a float, and it's going to go from 0 to 1. So we want 0 and 1. And then we want this float to be a property. We're going to call it cracking. And we're going to remap that as well. And I'll show you how this works. So right now, actually, it'll probably be easier if I turn this to 1 and 1 for now. So the way this works is we're going to remap this. So we're going to change this from 1 and this to 2. And we're going to leave this on 0 and this on 1. And then we're going to, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. And then we're going to clamp this sucker. I feel like this isn't... Okay. Clamp this sucker, and we're just going to add it to the colors here. So let's just see what happens now. So right now it's obviously ridiculous. We're not going to be doing that. But what we want to do is we want to put that into there. And we're going to clamp this to, sorry, we're going to remap this from 0 to 1 to 1 to 0.5, which sounds ridiculous, but I'll show you what's going to happen. So 0.1, 0 to 1, and then 1 to 0.5, okay? And now the cracks start at 0, but as we bring them up, they actually appear. How badass is that? It's super badass. You can say it. It's super fucking badass. So now let's put this back to 6 or 4, what we had it on before. And look at those cracks. That looks fantastic. We're going to, and see, look, we can make as many of them or as few of them as we want. Pretty cool, hey? So the other thing we have to do with this clamped crack, sounds kind of funny, is we got to add it to, we're just going to add it right into here, okay? Because anywhere where there's a crack, we don't want to be able to see through it and see these grid lines. So by doing that, we made the cracks nice and bright, and they are basically not see-through. They're just, they're completely opaque. So that's cool. So we've got that. Now the next thing we need to do is the depth. I'm going to create 2 objects so we can see the depth. So we're going to create a sphere, and I'm going to create a plane. Plane and a sphere, and I have this black, it's called ground, because oh my god, that white is ridiculous to look at. So we're going to do this. Okay, perfect. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull this sphere. So it's like right here. And that way we can see what happens with the depth. So we're going to use what's called a depth fader. So depth fade. And we are going to reverse it. So use the 1 minus. I don't like when it doesn't come up. Didn't type enough. And we're going to clamp it. And we are going to, actually, I think I might be wrong about this. No, I'm not wrong about this. I'm right, completely right. We're gonna move it way up here. I have it in a shitty place in my sample project, so we're gonna throw it up here and we're just gonna add it right into here. And let's see what happens. Check that out. So now anywhere that something intersects, we get an extra glow around the edge. We're gonna adjust the size of that a bit. I think a good number, sorry, it's up here, was 0.2. It could be a little more than that. Let's go 0.3, and let's create a brightness float for that. So we're going to want a few of these, actually. So we're going to want one for the grid, we're going to want one for the cracks, and we're going to want one for the depth. So let's call this one a property. Let's call it depth brightness. Let's do this one. Let's call it property. Let's call it grid brightness. and let's do this one and call it crack brightness. And we're going to do a bunch of floats, or sorry, multiplies. Duplicate that a couple times. I'm going to plug this one into here, this one into here, this one into here. And now, so this is our depth. So we're going to grab that and plug this into here. And then we're going to plug this into where the depth was going. Sort this out a little bit. And we're going to do the same thing. So this is the cracks right here. So we're going to go crack brightness. We're going to go right here. And we're going to plug this into where the cracks are going, like so. And then we're going to grab the grid. I think that's way down here. This guy right here. And we're going to multiply this again. We can actually just plug this guy right into here. I do believe. Okay, and we're going to hit refresh. So now it's going to look ridiculous. But if we play with these values, which are now exposed, let's go depth brightness, go 0.5. Oh, let's go 1.5. Yeah. And for grid brightness, let's go 0.5. Yeah, that works. And for crack brightness, let's go 1. Oh, shit, let's go like 2. And there you have it. Looking pretty sweet. I think we can actually up the grid brightness to let's say 0.8. Yeah, that's too bright. 0.6. And then, yeah, so we got a slider for cracking. We're golden. There's one more thing we have to do, and we have to, when the shield gets hit, we want it to glow, right? So, in order to do that, we take the, where is that now? Shield opacity, and we're going to add to that. So let's go add. Let's make a float called shield hit. And let's go property, and we're going to remap this because we don't want it to ever go above 1. So we want to go, so we're going to add this to this and this to here. And we're going to make this a 0 to 1. And we're going to remap it from 0 to 1 to 0 and let's say 0.5. There you go. So now you can just lerp this in code. You've got a working Winston Shield. How sweet is that? So this morning when I got up, I decided to load up Overwatch and go look at the shield, since it's been a while since I've done that, or, you know, when I'm playing, I just don't really notice all that much. So I did, and I noticed some things that we can fix up. And I noticed some things that I actually want to fix anyway that have nothing to do with how the shield looks. Well, I mean, they do, but it's more technicality than visual. So we're going to fix those up. And one thing that I noticed too is the texture. I changed the texture of the shield grid, so I'm going to include that in a link on the bottom. And yeah, let's get to fixing up the rest of that stuff. Here's where we left off when I recorded this last night. And one thing I wanted to kind of point out is just the way we're adding these colors, like the grid, the intersections, and the cracks. I actually want to change this a little bit. I don't really like the way we're doing it, and what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do it a little differently before I add the color. What I want to do is I want to add all these values together. I want to add the grid, I want to add the intersections, and I want to add the overall transparency of the shield together, and then we're going to use that value to give it color. But right now what we're doing is we're basically adding white to blue, and it just doesn't look as good. And as you can see, I'll pull this up. Essentially what we're doing is we're taking a color and we're adding it to all of these other values that we have here, right? So I don't think that's the right way to do it. The right way to do it, I'm going to show you right now, is, because I finally thought this out in my head, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, sorry, not multiply. We're going to do another add, And we're going to add, first of all, the shield opacity. Okay, and the shield hit we're going to add. And actually this can all, yeah, I think this will be okay. So we're going to add, well, let's do it this way. I think we might have to change something down here as well. But let's do this quickly. So I'm going to add this. And then we also want to add the crack brightness, of course. And we want to add the grid brightness. And we want to add the depth brightness. I'm going to add all these together. I feel like I'm missing something here. Oh, yeah. The crack brightness, I overwrote it. And what we're going to do is instead of adding all these together here, we're going to say multiply. We're going to take all of those things we just added and we're going to multiply them by this color and we're going to put it into emission. It's probably not going to look right quite yet, but we're going to have to make some tweaks here. Okay, so yeah, that definitely doesn't look right yet. But at least the grid, as faint as it is, you can kind of see that it's colored blue. We'll just make it a little bit brighter so we can see. So shield opacity is let's go like 0.5 or something. There, that already looks way better. Let's put that down to 0.3-ish. Now the other thing that you'll notice is we don't really see this Fresnel effect anymore. And it's very, very easy way to fix that. So we want the shield opacity and the Fresnel effect to go into opacity. But we also want the Fresnel effect to come up and be added to this color here. So what we're going to do is instead of adding this shield opacity right here, we're going to add this instead. Actually, let's use the clamped version. We're going to add this instead. And let's see what that does for us. So that's almost exactly what we wanted. So that's saved. And now let's turn the cracking up, make sure that still works. Ooh, looks even better than it did before. And let's turn the depth brightness up. That looks good. Grid brightness, we can crank the grid up a little bit. That looks good. But in game, and I'll show you in a sec, I recorded some footage. It's actually quite faint. It's almost hard to see. And it could just be because I was playing in a brightly lit level, but we'll see. So crack brightness, we can just leave how it was at 2. Okay, so we are set up now. I'm happy with this. So I'm just going to show you some things of the in-game footage. So let's just kind of fast forward this to a point. I just kind of went and jumped in with a bunch of bots here into a custom game. So right here we can see the shield is really faint, and this is a really brightly lit level, so it's harder to see, but you can see that the grid, there's some hexagons that are filled in and some that are empty. So what I did was I changed the texture to replicate that, as you can see right here. See? So we're good there, and I'll make that texture available. Now let's go to a spot where I actually got the shield to crack a little bit. So check that out, and then look at this. Like, we're pretty damn close to exactly making this shield. You know, the color might be off a little bit, like they're using a little bit of a brighter blue, but I mean, that is something you can change easily. Like, there you go. Now, the other thing, obviously we didn't do the middle piece here, you know, the little charge pack or whatever that the shield actually comes out of. You can do that in a different lesson or something, but I think the overall dome of the shield is what most people strive for. So that's golden. There was one more thing here that I noticed when I was doing this, and it's when the shield gets really close to breaking here. So it's kind of hard to tell. I'm just going to let it play for a sec. Okay, so you can see, so I'm going to do this again and just watch around the edges here. You'll see that this actually, the edge kind of glows and blinks. And remember how we set up the shield to be hit and the whole thing blinks? I think we did that wrong. I think what we need to do is just the edging needs to blink. So I'm just going to play it again. See how it's blinking? Okay, so we're going to replicate that. So that'll be really easy to do. So we have this shield hit value here. We can actually just, instead of remapping it and throwing it into the shield opacity, what we're going to do is we're going to bypass all this stuff with the shield opacity. We're just going to do this. We're going to get rid of this. We're going to get rid of this. We're going to keep this float. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this float into scale of the Fresnel. Okay. And we're going to hit refresh. And now we can do this. And we get that pretty much exact same effect. Now, the problem here is that we never want this to be 0 because we always want that glow, right? Like we always want it to be 1 as a default, and then we're going to kind of tweak it from there. So a good way to do this is to just use your remap. Okay, so we're going to remap 0 to 1, and we're going to change 0 to 1 to be, let's say, 0.6 and 1.5. So now when I go 0 to 1, sorry, I have to actually plug that in. Okay, hit refresh. And we can see that the shield hit, we can leave at about, I don't know, like point. Okay, let's change this remap to be 0.5 and 1.5. That way we know that if we have the value set at 0.5 exactly, that'll be 1, right? So now we can just lerp back and forth like this, creating a kind of a shield glow. And you can just do that in code. There's ways to do that in the shader as well, but I would probably just rather do that in a code. You know, use some kind of coroutine to lerp that value. And you can just lerp it really fast until the shield breaks. Easy. So there we go. Let's do a quick run through of exactly what we did here. And I think we can pretty much call it a day. So, or 2 days, I guess, since I recorded this over 2 days. So the first thing we did, well, here, let's just start from this top here. So we have a color, and that goes in to the emission, but it gets multiplied by the opacity of everything else, basically. Not the opacity, but the 0 to 1 value of everything else. And this actually goes above 1, right? Like when we're adding the shield opacity to the crack brightness is 2, and the shield opacity is 0.3. So we're already at 2.3 just for the cracks. And what that does is it allows the cracks to become even brighter than the blue color that we chose here, right? And that gives it kind of a glowing effect, right? Just think about like taking blue and then adding, you know, a really bright white to it and multiplying those together, and that's kind of the color that you're going to get. And then we have the shield hit down here. It is being remapped and thrown into Fresnel, right? And that just does this. Fresnel gives it the kind of glow effect, so the outside is brighter, the inside is not as bright. Kind of gives it like a kind of a lit effect, glowing effect. Okay, so that's really all these nodes down here are doing. The only thing we're putting into opacity is the Fresnel itself and the shield opacity added together. So that gives us our opacity. If we were to take that away, here's what it would look like. Not exactly great, right? Like it's usable, but you can't see through it. So not good. Sorry, you can see through it, but very, very little. So we want to keep that in there. The next thing we did, these are just our scan lines, just a texture coordinate being UV mapped, or sorry, being panned, and we're throwing that pan into the UV and we're scrolling a texture. That's all that is. So we're multiplying that with the actual grid pattern, and that's what gives it this kind of scan effect. Very easy. Just going to refresh so I can see the actual shield. The cracking is probably the most complex part. We have this crack texture that isn't solid white, right? So what we're doing is we're taking those values. So that's a 0 to 1 value. The solid white stuff is 1, and black is 0, and everything's kind of somewhere in between. And what we're doing is we're using this crack value here to kind of find those values and bring them to life as we slide it up. So you get more and more cracks as you slide this up. That's really all we're doing. Of course, there's a little bit of extra work there, like we have a remap here and another remap here, and then we're clamping it all, and then we're multiplying it by a brightness value. It's all really simple stuff, and I'll just click on each of these so you can see the values. 1, 1, 2, and then we're passing into the min here is this one. So that's pretty simple. And then the depth fade is really simple. We just reverse it because we want the reverse of what the effect actually does. And then we clamp that, and then we multiply it by how bright we actually want this depth brightness. And we add all that stuff together, multiply it by the color, put it in, and we're done. So that's pretty much it for a Winston Shield. Pretty cool. The last thing we're going to do is we're just going to make sure this is all named correctly. So we got this texture sample here. We're going to see this in the inspector, so let's name it crack texture. And let's name this one grid texture. And let's name this one scan texture. And I think that's all the textures. Let's just refresh that. And I don't think there's anything else that is named oddly right now. So what we can do is just quickly, let's put the color at the top. So at the very bottom of Amplify Shader, you can mess with the order of things, which is kind of nice. The other thing that's kind of in a weird spot is the shield opacity. I don't like that. Let's put it below the rest of the textures, and we'll just hit refresh. And now everything. So colors at the top, your 3 textures, and then all your values are right down here. And that's it. That's how you create a Winston Shield from start to finish. I might go ahead and make another tutorial soon on the middle part that, kind of gives the shield its life in the game. But yeah, you could definitely use this shield for plenty of things. So have fun with it, and keep learning. Talk to you later.